If I could only grow 2 crops a year, I'd grow tomatoes in summer and garlic in fall and winter. And there's a few different reasons for that, but the main one is that garlic is an extremely simple crop to grow in a wide variety of climates, and it requires almost no maintenance at all. And that's probably why I've been growing garlic for over a decade now, and I've absolutely fallen in love with it. So in this video, I'll share with you my process for growing garlic, and also share a few tips and ideas on how to get big, beautiful cloves, whether you're in a cold northern zone or a warm southern zone. And the first step is sourcing your seed garlic. For the past 10 years, I've been buying all of my garlic from Peaceful Valley Nursery, which is a local nursery to me, but they also have a website, groworganic.com, where they ship all over the country. And this video is not sponsored by this nursery, but if you haven't bought your garlic yet, they actually gave me a discount code where you can get 25% off all of their seed garlic and garlic growing supplies like liquid kelp. So if you're interested in that, there's more details on the video description below. As far as varieties go, there's hundreds of varieties, but there's really only 2 types that you need to be aware of. Those 2 types are softneck and hardneck. Softneck is what you'll most commonly find at the grocery store because it has the longest shelf life, usually between 9 and 12 months. And the reason for that is that each clove is tightly wrapped with multiple layers of this papery skin, but that also makes it a bit more difficult to work with in the kitchen. The main consideration though with these softneck varieties is that they're most adapted to a warm southern climate, so they'll do best in zones 6 through 10. You can try growing them in the colder northern zones, but be sure to plant them extra deep in well-drained soil and use a really thick layer of mulch. But you're going to have your best results with any of the hardneck varieties, like this Spanish Roja, which is one of my favorites. Hardneck varieties usually have fewer but larger cloves that are much easier to peel than softneck garlic. But that ease of peeling also reduces their shelf life a bit to about 6 to 8 months compared to the 9 to 12 months from softneck varieties. Although the garlic does have a stronger flavor and a higher potency of the medicinal properties that garlic is known for. Hardneck varieties are also the only type to produce this delicious garlic scape, which is the flower that emerges in spring, and you want to cut that off and eat it because it's delicious, and if you leave it on, it takes the energy away from bulking up this bulb. It's also really important to know that hardneck varieties have to be grown in climates that experience a cold winter because they do have a chill requirement. Hardnecks can though be grown in warm southern climates by tricking them into thinking you're in a cold northern climate by vernalizing them in the refrigerator. Bag up your garlic and put it in the refrigerator for 4 to 8 weeks. This will allow you to grow hardneck varieties in warmer climates, and if you're trying to grow garlic in a tropical climate like Florida, you should do this with hardneck and softneck varieties. And then there's elephant garlic. And I know I said there's just 2 main types of garlic, but that's because elephant garlic is not a true garlic. It's actually more closely related to the leek, but we call it elephant garlic because it looks like a giant clove of garlic. I mean, look at this thing. It's almost the same size, actually larger than this entire bulb of this hardneck variety, but it also smells, tastes, and grows just like regular garlic, so we call it elephant garlic. And we grow it pretty much the same way, only we plant it a little bit deeper, a little bit further apart, but otherwise it's just a giant clove of garlic. So if you can find elephant garlic to grow in your area, I highly recommend it. Okay, so that's all great, but none of this explains that brown liquid in the beginning of this video. This is liquid kelp, and it's completely optional, but a lot of gardeners swear by this method of soaking your cloves of garlic overnight in a liquid kelp solution to give them a bit of a nutrient boost before planting. All right, we're gonna take a little field trip to my original urban farmstead and plant this garlic. There are a few reasons I'm choosing to grow my garlic here at my original farmstead rather than back at my home garden. And the first is that garlic really prefers loose, well-draining soil. So these raised beds provide the ideal conditions for growing garlic. And that's not to say you can't plant your garlic in in-ground rows like I have back at my other urban farmstead. I mean, that's how farmers all over the world have been growing their garlic for ages, and it does work well. But just be sure, if you do have that heavy clay soil that does not drain well, like the soil that I have, you put plenty of organic matter or compost into it to improve that drainage. And then also be sure to mound up your rows, because garlic does not like to sit in wet, soggy soil. Garlic can even be grown in pots or other containers if you're limited on your garden space. Just use any container that's at least 6 inches deep, has some holes for drainage, and fill it up with a nice loose potting soil. And then the simplest way, I think, to grow garlic is just sneak a few cloves into your flower garden or somewhere in your ornamental landscape. I do that every year with a few extra cloves that I have, and it actually works pretty well. Speaking of simplicity, that's the other reason I'm choosing to grow my garlic here at my original urban farmstead, because I really only visit this garden about once a month right now, so I can only plant crops here that are very low maintenance. And garlic is probably the most low maintenance crop that I grow. I mean, I could literally put the cloves in the ground today and not return until they're ready to harvest in spring, and I would still get pretty nice garlic bulbs. But there are a few things that I'll do to improve the soil, and some small chores I'll do throughout the growing season that will greatly improve the size of my bulbs and the quality of my garlic. And that's what I'll show you today. As with most crops, garlic does prefer full sun, but it will tolerate part shade. So when you're choosing your planting location in fall, keep in mind that some of the beds that get full sun in summer might be partially or mostly shaded in winter when the sun is lower in the horizon. This bed here is a perfect example of that. This fence is all along the south side of this bed. So in summer it gets really good sunlight when the sun is nice and high in the sky. But this time of year, and especially later in winter, when the sun is low in the horizon, this fence almost completely shades out this bed. So you could grow garlic here, but it is not going to do very well. Another important consideration when choosing where to plant your garlic is crop rotation, which is a pretty broad subject that I'm not really going to get into, but just try to avoid planting garlic where garlic or other alliums like onions and leeks were growing in the previous year, and really up to 3 years ideally. But I know sometimes with small gardens, crop rotation is not an option. So if it's not an option for you, it should be fine planting garlic in the same spot, just as long as you haven't had any big issues with allium diseases in the past, because that's one of the things we're trying to avoid with crop rotation. And be sure you amend the soil really well to replenish the nutrients that the garlic or other alliums took up in that previous growing season. Speaking of amending the soil, I think it's time to prep some beds. When I remove my summer crops in fall, I always add about a 2-inch layer of compost to each bed to feed and build that soil, regardless of what I'm planting, but especially when I'm planting garlic. This black hose I have here in this bed is a soaker hose, and this is the irrigation that I use usually for my summer crops, and I do have a full video on this, so I'll add a link to it in the video description below if you're interested. But this type of hose can be buried under a few inches of mulch or even compost or soil, so I'll leave this in place right now. I'm just going to add another layer of compost to this bed. Even though we plant garlic in fall, it really does most of its vigorous growing in late winter and spring. So that's when I'll come back and I'll add a nice balanced fertilizer to provide plenty of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But there is one more thing I will be adding to the soil in addition to this compost, and that is bone meal. Bone meal is a great source of calcium and phosphorus is important for root development and bulb growth. So adding this now will help the cloves establish a strong root system early, making them more resilient over winter and then more vigorous as the bulbs develop in spring. I like to maintain my soil structure by not tilling it all, so I'll just gently scratch this into the surface. I really like this tool for planting garlic. I think it's called a dibber, but of course you can just use a regular trowel, a stick, or even your thumb to make the holes anywhere from 4 to 6 inches apart. Exact spacing is not necessary, but if you're kind of OCD like I am and you like perfect spacing and nice straight rows, A tape measure like this is a really simple way to achieve that. I'll make a hole at each of the 1 foot marks, then I'll come back and split the difference for a perfect 6-inch spacing on a straight line. Once the first row is all straight and evenly spaced, I'll just eyeball the rest of them. I'll plant part of this bed with this fresh, untreated garlic, as I normally do, and the other part of the bed with these cloves that I soaked overnight in liquid kelp. This type of split planting is something I do quite often with long season crops, in order to use the techniques that worked for me in the past, but also experiment with something new. The largest cloves will produce the largest bulbs, so small cloves like this will just go back to the kitchen. Then I'll plant these larger cloves with the pointy side up and the flat side down about 2 inches deep. 6-inch spacing works great for me, but garlic can be planted as close as 4 inches apart, and if you're growing elephant garlic, it should be more like 10 to 12 inches apart. I usually plant my garlic anytime from late October to early December, but planting times are going to vary depending on your climate. So as a general rule, it's best to plant around the time of your first frost, but before your ground freezes solid. If you missed your fall planting window, you can wait and do a late planting. You're just going to get smaller cloves. Now I'll add a layer of mulch, which for me is mostly about preventing weeds through my mild winters, but if you're growing garlic in a colder climate, a thick layer of mulch helps protect from freeze, and if you're growing in a warmer climate or a tropical climate like Florida, it's going to help retain moisture and prevent your soil from becoming too warm. And if I didn't pre-soak my cloves in liquid kelp, I could water them in with liquid kelp right now. Don't forget to add labels, especially when you're growing different varieties, because I know for myself, I think I'll remember, but I seldom do. Over the next few months, my main chore here will be to keep this bed weed-free, because garlic does not like competition. In addition to that, I might provide some supplemental irrigation if I have a long period of warm, dry weather, which is certainly a possibility here in California. But in most parts of the country, and hopefully here, the rain will be enough to irrigate the garlic through the season. Then come springtime, when the weather warms up, those green tops will start to grow vigorously and the bulbs will bulk up. And that's when I'll come back and I'll feed the garlic with a nice balanced organic fertilizer. Shortly after that, those green tops will start to yellow and die back. And when 1/3 of the green tops die back, that's when I know my garlic is ready to harvest. But by then, I'll be back here with another video showing you when to harvest, how to store and cure your garlic, and maybe even how to braid it. So if you want to see that video or any of my other upcoming videos on how I'm creating my new urban farmstead, hit the subscribe button. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. And if you have any questions at all, ask them in the comments below. Happy gardening, everyone.